talking about color grading scopes. Now, scopes are basically tools that you use to monitor the color and exposure of your scene. Now, a lot of color grading, at least, from my perspective, is done by eye. You kind of look at the image and make adjustments and just basically do what looks right. I certainly like to work that way. I like working just kind of in a natural style and not so technical about things. However, you can get really technical about it and use these tools to look at, where your black points are, where your white points are, where your exposure levels are following. And even if you don't want to be technical about it and you're using your eye most of the time, the scopes can come in handy when you're trying to get your image just right. So the first scope that I'm going to show you here today is the histogram. Most of you are probably familiar with the histogram since most cameras have one of these on them, and you'll use it while you're monitoring your images while you're shooting. Now, this one looks a little bit different here in Premiere. It's actually vertical as opposed to the horizontal ones that most of you are probably used to and what you see on cameras. But basically down here we have our shadows and up here we have our highlights, and this is just showing us the range of tonal values in the shot. So we've got more shadows happening here and then less highlights happening here. So there's a lot of shadow, more midtones, less kind of whites, highlights up here, but then we've got this bright spot here, which is our window over here. Now, the problem with the histogram is that even though it shows you where the tonal values are in the scene, it doesn't show you exactly where they map to the actual image. So let's go over to our waveform monitor, and a waveform is kind of like a more advanced version of the histogram. So the way a waveform works is down here at the bottom, we have our shadows, and down here at the top, we have our highlights. So this is showing us 0% luminance, and this up here is showing us 100% luminance. But the left and right, unlike the histogram, are not shadows and highlights. That's up and down. What this is showing us is actually left and right of the image. So this over here is the left side of the image. This over here is the right side of the image. So you'll notice that we've got these really bright highlights up here on the right side, and that's that window that we're seeing over on the right side of the image. We've also got this really big peak right here, and that is most likely the lamp over here, which is another bright spot, and some of it is probably this highlight on the back of her shirt. And then over here, we've got some of the shadows and midtones happening. So you can see there's a lot of red in here. That's going to be this foosball table over here. And then some of the blue that you're seeing in the shadows as well on this side of the image is going to be this blue wall behind our talent. So the waveform monitor allows us to see where our values are within the image. So if I wanted to check the exposure of a specific object in the image, like the lamp, for example, I could do that here. So you'll see as we go through here and we adjust these values, I can bring our blacks down and we could bring them down so that they're hitting, 0 right there. And, anything below that is going to crush the blacks. We can bring our highlights up, which are not quite hitting 100%, but oh, yes, they are. Actually, never mind. We can bring our shadows up. We can bring our whites up. We can make adjustments here, and it's going to adjust what's happening over there on the waveform monitor. This is also a really good way to check the exposure values of specific items in the scene. So, for example, if I wanted to check where our guys' skin tones are at and make sure that they're exposed at the level that we want them to be, I could go over here to our effect controls and add a mask over his skin tones. So I'll take this mask and I'll put it just over his face so that we're only looking at his face. And then I'll go back to my scopes, and then you can see where the values are. So our talent here is being exposed at about, that red is kind of around like 60 IRE, which is, right about probably where we want it for this scene. So let's go ahead and undo that. So that's where a waveform monitor comes in handy, is you can see specific things in the scene and see where their exposure values are. And you can also see different RGB values based on, where things are in the scene. Now, the last scope that we're going to look at is the vector scope. Unlike the histogram and the waveform, which show you your exposure values throughout the scene, the vector scope shows you what your colors are doing. So the vector scope is basically a direct replica of the color wheel. So you notice that we have red up here, magenta over here, blue, cyan, green, yellow, and goes around and around. And it is showing where our colors are in the scene. So all of this white cloudy stuff here is showing us what colors are in the scene and how saturated they are. So this part of the image is something that's pretty yellow and it's pretty saturated. So the further out it goes, the more saturated it is. The closer it is to the center, the less saturated it is. So this is showing us that we have some red and orange and kind of yellow happening in the scene that's pretty well saturated out here, which you can see in the scene. There is quite a bit of that in the foosball table and this wall in the background. And then we've also got some blue and cyan happening that is pretty well saturated over here, which is this wall behind our talent and his blue sweater. So this tool is really valuable, especially when you are exporting video for broadcast and where there are standards and certain levels that can't be passed. These squares out here are actually showing us where you can saturate your colors to for those broadcast scenarios. For most of the work that I'm doing, I'm never even getting close to those squares. And so for the most of the work that you do, you probably won't either. So anything within this zone is safe and that's not a problem. But that's just another use for this tool. Now, the way that I'd use this tool normally is for checking the value and the color of skin tones, which we'll talk about in another video. But you can use the vector scope to see where your skin tones are at and how saturated they are. So there you go. There's the 3 most commonly used scopes in color grading. Again, a lot of color grading is done by eye, but it's really a combination of looking at your image and seeing what looks good, referencing it against other work, and then using your tools to judge exposure and color values to get it looking just right. Okay, so now we're going to talk about using secondaries. Now, secondaries are a little bit more advanced level color grading, and it gives you a little bit finer control over which colors you're selecting and how you're affecting them. So we use the curves and the color wheels to adjust different parts of the image, whether it was the midtones and shadows or different colors or saturation values. And so you can use those for kind of broad strokes, but the secondary is what gives you kind of that sniper that allows you to pick exact specific parts of the image or specific colors and then change them or affect them. So if you go into the secondary panel here, you'll notice that there are a lot of knobs and colors and a lot of stuff going on. I'm going to break this all down for you. Now, I should note that in Final Cut, this is called a color mask. So you actually create a color mask, which will allow you to select a specific color. In DaVinci Resolve, this is done using the qualifier tool, but it all works exactly the same way and has the exact same tools, okay? So up here at the top of the secondaries window, we've got the selector, okay? This is where you choose the color that you want to be working with. Now, the easiest way to do this is to just choose the eyedropper tool and go over here and select a color that you want to affect. So we're going to focus on the skin tones in this video. So I'm just going to select his skin tones right there. And then I'll use the eyedropper with the plus tool to just kind of drag around his face, which is going to pick a lot of these colors. Now you'll notice that our sliders here kind of changed as I was doing that. These sliders each represent hue, saturation, and our luminance or intensity, right? So these are how we're going to select the color. So you can see that it's selecting a range of colors that goes from red to over to orange and then kind of fades out through into yellow. Okay, so that's the area that it's selecting there. So it's selecting everything that is within that hue range. It's selecting everything that's within this saturation range. Okay, so, pretty unsaturated to, kind of medium saturated there. And then it's selecting everything within this luminance range. All right, and you can adjust these and adjust how much of the image is being selected. So if I check this box down here, it will show me over here exactly what is being selected. So you'll notice I've got his skin tones on his hands there, on her skin tones. We've got, the foosball table here as well, a little bit of this lamp, some of this back wall. So I can make adjustments to this. Let's say I want to kind of push it this way and adjust and grab more of that back wall. I can kind of adjust this and get it where I want. Now, when you're making adjustments to these sliders, the general rule of thumb is that you just want to adjust them so that they end up selecting more of what you want and less of what you don't want. Okay, so I might make little adjustments here. As I'm widening this one, I'm actually getting more of what I want. I want kind of all of the warm tones in this image. So I might move this direction, but I want to make sure I'm not losing the skin tones. See, if I go too far down on the saturation, I'm starting to pick up his shirt in here and her shirt there, which I don't want. So I'm going to narrow this a little bit and then kind of move it up to the right some more. So we're getting just those skin tones and anything like it. And then same thing with the luminance. I can kind of bounce around with this. I want to make sure I'm getting the shadows as well. And we'll kind of narrow that a little bit. Oh, actually, I'm losing some of the highlights on his forehead, so I need to make it a little bit bigger so that I get the shadows and the highlights. And that's pretty good right there. Okay, so now we've selected the color that we want to affect. Now the next step is down here, there's a blur tool, so you can use this to blur the lines. That way, once we make adjustments to this color, there won't be like a hard line of change. So I'll usually blur this out quite a bit to just, kind of make sure that we don't have any hard lines there. And then once that's selected, now I can deselect this. We've got that color selected. Now I can use this color wheel down here to make whatever adjustments I want to just that range. So you'll notice if I drag around on this color wheel, it's going to change the color of just that area that we selected in the image. Okay, so we can change the color of it like that, and then we can change the exposure of it. So I can increase it, I can decrease it. You can do all sorts of crazy stuff with it. You also have controls down here for temperature, tint, contrast. You can sharpen it, you can saturate it, desaturate it, whatever you want. Now, one of the best use cases for this tool is for getting your skin tones right. And that's why we selected his skin tones. So I'm going to show you how to use the secondaries tool in order to get somebody's skin tones accurate. There's actually a scientific way of doing this, and we're going to do it using the vector scope. So on every vector scope, you've got the entire color wheel here with all of your colors. And on every vector scope, you're going to have a line here that runs diagonally from about northwest to about southeast. Okay, this line that runs diagonally right here. This is known as the skin tone line. This line actually represents the color of the blood that runs through human skin. So if you want your skin tones to be natural, then they should be right on that line. It's actually really interesting because it doesn't matter if you have darker skin or if you have lighter skin, everybody has the same color of blood. So everybody's skin tones are actually the same hue, the same color, even though maybe saturation or luminance or intensity values might vary from individual to individual. And so every single person, regardless of their race or skin color, can actually be color graded so that their skin tones are accurate right on that skin tone line. Okay, so let's go ahead and do this. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my effect controls and open up a mask here so that I can just be working with the skin tone values on our guy here. So I'm going to adjust this mask so it's just on his face, just like this. And what that's going to allow us to do is when I go back to my vector scope, it'll show me only what I have inside of that mask. Now you'll notice that our skin tones right now are a little bit tilted towards the red side. They're a little too red. And so we can make that adjustment over here on our secondaries. Again, this is only going to select or modify what we selected. So I'm going to take my color wheel here and I'm just going to drag it down towards the green and yellow part of the color wheel. And notice how that little cloud on the vector scope has now moved so that it's right over the skin tone line. Okay, so we can go from there. Now let's go ahead and delete this mask and get rid of it. And you'll notice that our image now looks a lot more natural. Those skin tones are a lot more natural. Let's go ahead and A/B back and forth. So this was before when everything was looking just a little bit too red. Let me make that a little bit bigger so you can see it. And this is after. See how much better that looks and more natural it is? So this is how you can use the secondaries and your vector scope in order to get skin tones right, but you can also use this to do any number of other things. So for example, if I wanted to change the color of this lamp back here, I could, or any specific item that's a different color than something else in the image. You can do all sorts of adjustments. You can do multiple layers of these and do, whatever adjustments you need to your image. So where the curves tools and the color wheel tools kind of give you a broad ability to change colors, the secondary gives you kind of that very specific approach to adjusting your image. So there you go. There's a quick video on how to use secondaries to get accurate skin tones. Hopefully that was helpful. If you have questions about that, feel free to let me know, and we'll see you on the next one. All right, so in this video, we're going to talk about the fastest and easiest way to get professional and accurate color in your color grading, and that is using reference images. So rather than going into your color grade just all willy-nilly and just kind of messing with the sliders and tweaking the colors and just seeing what looks good, having a reference image to base your color grade off of will make you work a lot more efficiently and make you work just faster as an editor. It also develops your eye as a colorist because you start to learn how to see what other people are doing in their coloring, and you can kind of use the tools and figure out how to match that with the tools that you have available to you. So in this video, I'm going to walk you through color grading a scene using the scene that we've been working on, and we're going to match it to a still that I pulled from the internet. So if you go in here into Premiere, you notice that I've got an image here that I have saved. This is a clip from Dan in Real Life, the movie. And so I'll open that up in my source monitor and then just drag my source monitor over here so I can have it right next to our main clip and I can kind of reference that. Now, the funny thing about this, and this is going to be an interesting challenge, I tried to pick something that was pretty drastically different from what we have already. Now, obviously, you know, we've talked about this before, set design, wardrobe, lighting, like all of those things go into the overall color of a film. And so, you know, this scene with Dan in Real Life, like they obviously had the benefit of knowing what they were going for when they were shooting it. They've lit it that way. His wardrobe, you know, he's wearing a gray-ish shirt that, you know, color grades green pretty well. I've got these green walls. There's a green couch over here. There's a lot of things happening that, you know, we didn't have that advantage with this. What we're doing is we're just taking a video that we've shot previously and trying to adopt that color. So we're going to see how well this goes. And I'm just going to kind of walk you through my thought process as I go through this and I try to create a color palette with my image here that kind of mimics this really cool like green and yellow color palette of Dan in Real Life. Okay. So the first thing I want to look at is we've obviously got this green. Okay, so this is, you know, this green is not a natural color. This is sunlight coming through the window. And so we've got this lamp here that's yellow, kind of lighting up this room, all yellow. And then this is all green. That is clearly color graded that way because it wouldn't be that color naturally, right? And so we need to kind of match that in our scene with, you know, most of our walls here. So we've got some gray here. These walls are probably naturally gray, right? And so we've got some gray here. These are gray. This counter is gray. This wall looks like it's kind of a muted blue, but basically all of this we want to kind of push towards green. And then some of this warmer tone stuff and the skin tones and the lamp and everything we'll obviously want to keep kind of that yellow look. So I'm going to start off by using our color wheels over here. And I'm just going to grab our midtones and just kind of start pushing them into green. And we're just going to see what we can make happen. So we're pushing that into green and notice that right away we start getting this really intense green effect. I'm going to try and match the color. So basically where I'm looking right here is at this wall. I think this wall and this stone above this fireplace right here are about the same color. This might be a little bit darker, but I think hue-wise, like there's the same kind of gray. And so I'm going to try and match those. So right now this is a little bit too green. This is a little more teal. So I'm going to pull it a little bit more towards teal and just try to get those like pretty similar. Okay, I don't want to go too intense and make it like the Matrix. We just want to kind of pull it back. Let's dial it back kind of in that teal range and try to get those similar in color. Okay, so now we've got those, like those are pretty even right there. So that's about looking good. You'll notice that looking at this countertop, we've got the same kind of hue happening here. Same thing is happening back here. We're getting some of that green, you know, just pushing into the image here. Now I'm going to adjust my shadows as well. So I'll take my shadows color wheel here and just kind of mess around with it. I don't want the shadows to go too green. I want to keep those pretty neutral. And so I might just like take the shadows. Yeah. So I'm going to push the shadows back towards maybe like towards red, just ever so slightly, which is going to kind of pull them back away from that green. Midtones, you know, when you adjust your midtones, it's going to affect a little bit of the shadows as well, because there's some overlap between these color wheels. And so if I take those shadows and just push them away from green, so like here's neutral right now, and if I push them away from green, then we just get a little bit of like kind of pull back from that so the shadows don't look too saturated. Okay, so I feel like that looks pretty nice. And then as far as highlights go, you know, we might move those towards green just ever so slightly. It's really just the subtlest of things. That's looking pretty good. We're about in the ballpark. Now I do want to adjust my shadows here because you'll notice that in this scene we've got some pretty dark crushed blacks and mine are a little bit more lifted here. So I'm going to bring my shadows down to kind of meet that level. But I don't want to crush them too much, so I might bring my mid-tones down, like we talked about in the color grading video, and then bring the shadows back up just so that we get, you know, a nice smooth tonal range down there in the shadows, but still kind of have that, you know, crushed black effect. So maybe about right there. And then, you know, I might push the greens just a little bit more. Make that effect a little bit more intense. So again, I'm really looking right here. Like I want this color to just about match that color, and we're getting pretty close there. Now, what is happening here is because we're taking this image and we're pushing all this green into it, well, all of our warm tones here, which we want to match this yellow with, are getting kind of infiltrated with green as well. So I'm going to go up to my curves up here and just kind of play with that. In fact, the first thing that I'm going to do before I do that is work with this wall right here. So notice we've got this blue wall. It's not really a problem. We're obviously working with a different colored wall than, you know, the scene from this movie, but I think this will look better and look more like it if we change the color of that wall. So I'm going to choose my color dropper here and then just kind of pick that color of blue on our hue versus hue, and then just kind of start pushing that up a little bit until we get it into that green range. Now that's pretty green. I think that's where I want it though. And then I'm going to select the same, let's go ahead and select the same range up here on our saturation curves. And I'm just going to bring the saturation of it down. If you ever have colors that are just, you know, not working in your scene or not doing what you want them to, it works to just kind of desaturate them, just kind of pull them out, just get rid of them altogether sometimes. So we're going to change the color of that, make sure that it's right where we want it. And that's, you know, that's about the green that we want. So now we got to do something about those warm tones, because all of our lamp and our warm and everything in here is now all just like really green. And so we want to pull that back a little bit. So I'll use my dropper here again and just select the lamp so we get kind of a range. I'm going to extend this range just a little bit to the sides. And then let's go ahead and start pushing some red into that, okay? We don't want to go too far, obviously, but just a slight effect. So that's what we're starting with, very green. Just by pushing that up just ever so slightly, it's giving us more of an orange effect, which is kind of more what we want. We really want to try and match this, which is really yellow, which means it has quite a bit of green in it, because if you take orange and you add green to it, it makes it more yellow. And so let's just kind of try to match that. And then I'm going to do the same thing up here with our saturation and increase the saturation of that. Okay, that's starting to feel really good. Okay, and that might be slightly too orange. Maybe we want it to be a little bit more green. Just like that. Okay, and we can kind of play with the saturation and figure out where we want it. I might widen this a little bit. And put it, you know, maybe about right there. That's getting us pretty close. It's not going to be perfect, but we do what we can. Another thing I want to try, and I'm not really sure how this is going to go over, but let's try just grabbing that yellow right here and just maybe increasing the luminance of it a little bit. Because that lamp in the movie shot is a little bit more blown out. So maybe that'll help us a little bit. All right, so that's looking pretty good. Just going to make some minor adjustments here to the overall color. I feel like the green that we pushed into this image is maybe just slightly too much, so I'll go back down to my color wheels here and just back that off a tiny bit. Just kind of make it, you know, a little bit less saturated so we get a more natural looking effect. And this is looking really good already. So the last thing that we want to look at is skin tones. So I'm going to open up my secondary here. I want to make sure that, you know, regardless of what we're doing to the scene, we still make sure that our skin tones are feeling natural. I'm going to go in here and just kind of select those skin tones using this qualifier tool. And we'll just kind of do a rough job of it just for the sake of time right now. And let's kind of select our skin tones there. Maybe we want a little more of this. Just kind of open it up a little bit more. And then let's take those and play around with them a little bit. They're feeling a little warm. We maybe want to, you know, pull the green out of them. Go a little bit more towards magenta. And that's feeling really nice there. So We can go before. They were just a little bit green. After, we're making those skin tones maybe a little bit too magenta. Let's pull back a little bit. It's always a good idea to just kind of A/B your shots, kind of go back and forth and see how they feel, because you'll be able to see things that you maybe wouldn't be able to otherwise. Maybe even work with the saturation there a little bit. Pull that down just a tad. And there we go. We've got an image now that is pretty closely resembling this shot from Dan in Real Life. Now, once again, like, we didn't have the benefit of set design and wardrobe and everything else, and still, you know, regardless, we still ended up with a pretty nice shot here. The last thing I might do, actually, just notice this, is that his jacket is just a little bit of that kind of magenta-y blue. So I'm going to grab that and just push that towards green as well, just so it kind of matches the rest of the image. I don't really like how it's standing out. So let's grab that and just push some more green into it. About like that. And then again, once again, we're going to just kind of desaturate that a little bit so it's not, you know, too intense. And there you go. Now, if you kind of look back and forth between the two shots, we've got a pretty similar look. Again, you know, we're working with completely different set design and wardrobe here, but this is how you can use references to really guide the decisions that you're making as far as color grading. If you've got a reference, you've got a movie or a commercial that you've seen, and you really want to match the look of it, in most cases, you're gonna, you know, that process is gonna start while you're shooting the film, right? And you're going to be looking at, okay, what time of day should I be shooting? What color do I need to be paying attention to in the wardrobe, the location, the set design, those kind of things. And so you're going to be paying attention to that there. But, you know, even in an extreme situation like this, like I would call this like a pretty extreme, drastic change in color, you can still do a pretty good job of kind of pulling back and finding that balance where you get that resemblance of the scene that you're looking for. So anyway, let's go ahead and just do an A/B back and forth. So if we go back to what we had before, that was the original color. Again, nothing like the movie. And then if we add our color grade, that's what we ended up with. Not bad. So there you go. There's how you can use references to speed up your color grading process. Again, this is one of the best ways that you can really make sure that you're getting accurate color and getting professional looking color, is just by modeling what other people are already doing and doing well. So give that a try sometime. Go out, find a reference that you want to model, bring it into your color grading software, use the tools that you have at your disposal, and see how well you can match it. It's a really great way to not only get really good quality images right off the bat, but also to develop your skills as a colorist and really learn how to use the tools. Okay, so now that we've got your color all done, now we're gonna go through a finishing process to just kind of finish off your color and get it ready for export. So I'm gonna take you through my 3 steps that I go through to finish my color grading before exporting, and let's go ahead and jump into it. So the first tip is to add a finishing LUT. So now that we've got our color all set here, we've got our entire video color graded and ready to go, we're gonna add a finishing LUT on top of the footage. The goal with a finishing LUT is to take the color that we've done. When you're working with a commercial like this, all of your scenes are going to look somewhat different because you've color graded them all differently. And so they have different colors in them and everything. And what we're going to do is we're taking all of these different color grades that you've done throughout your commercial, and we're going to add a finishing LUT on top of them that's just going to kind of bring them all back together, kind of make the whole thing look somewhat cohesive. And so you can do this with any LUT. So you could use one of the LUTs from the course. You could use any LUTs that you've downloaded. There are, you know, special LUTs out there that some people offer that are specifically finishing LUTs that you could look at. The way I do this is using a plugin called Film Convert. Now, Film Convert is a film emulation software. And so this is kind of cool. It's more than just a LUT. It's actually doing a conversion of your footage to a film emulation, which is kind of neat. So we're kind of adding that filmic look on top of the entire video. And so the way we're going to do this is, first of all, I'm going to create a new adjustment layer, which I've already created one here, and I'm going to put that adjustment layer on top of my entire video. Okay. So this is a color grade that we're adding to the entire video all the way from beginning to end. All right. Now, once that's there, I'm going to add the Film Convert plugin to that adjustment layer. So right here. And you'll notice it's going to create this crazy effect. So with Film Convert, you can go in and actually choose your camera. So I'll choose red. This was shot on the red Scarlet W with a Dragon sensor, Dragon Color 2, Red Gamma 4. And it'll actually choose your camera and do the emulation specifically for your camera, which is kind of cool. And then it's got all these, color correction tools and everything. We're going to jump down here to film stock. And you can flip through these and just see what all these different film stocks are doing. Obviously, they're a little bit intense right now. We're going to dial back that intensity as we go. But you can kind of flip through here and just find one that you really like. And there's one down here that I like that I think looks really cool. Okay, now things are looking a little bit dark, it's a little bit intense, but I like the color of this, and I think it'd be a nice color for the entire film. So I'm going to use these controls here with Film Chroma and Film Luma to just kind of dial this back a little bit. So if we go to like 50%, we can see how that looks. See before and after. That's pretty good. That's still a little bit intense, so let's go down to maybe like 25%. I just want to add a subtle hint of color to the image. Okay. I think that's nice. And then it is also, as I'm doing that, it's also making the image just a little bit darker. And so I can use my exposure tool up here and just increase it ever so slightly. We want to get it so that it feels like just the color is changing and the exposure isn't, because I've already kind of dialed in the exposure with my color grade. And that's that. So that now is a LUT, or a film conversion in this case, that is being applied to the entire video, which is just going to make the entire video feel a little bit more cohesive and like it comes together. So that's the first step. The second step is to add film grain. So if you want to add a kind of filmic, grainy look to your images, this is how you would do it. There's a lot of ways to do this, but regardless of how you choose to do it, adding a film grain is nice. I do it on most of the work that I do. A very subtle effect, but it just helps kind of take that digital edge off of your images and makes it feel just a little bit softer and more natural looking. So you can download film grains from all sorts of places that you can throw on your footage, and they work great. I actually am going to use Film Convert for this because they also have film grain emulation built into this, which is what makes this a really nice tool for finishing your color grade. So this is going to happen here on the same exact adjustment layer. And if I scroll down here on Film Convert, you'll notice that there are some film grain controls here. So I have some presets that I can go through that are from different film cameras. So, if you go up here like 8mm, you're going to get really, really intense, thick grain. Down here is going to be less noticeable. We'll kind of choose a preset somewhere in the middle. I can increase the size of the grain. So, you'll notice that grain is really, really big. So I can find a size that works really well. And hey, let's say that we wanted to go with like, a pretty decent sized grain. And then we'll just kind of bring the strength down until you can't really see it anymore. So just to where it's just a very, very subtle effect. We can add some softness to it to kind of help take some of that digital edge off, like I said, and then adjust the saturation as well. And that's how we're going to put that film grain on it. So now that we got the film grain on, we can just go ahead and go back and forth. That's before, this is after. Looks like we're adding just a little bit of contrast to the image that I don't like that much. So there are controls down here where we can go to color correction and we can adjust some of that as well. So we've got curves, levels, color wheels, and everything. Rather than just a contrast slider, we might have to just kind of adjust our shadows a little bit. So, okay, we've got to be really careful. These are pretty touchy. So we're going to increase our shadows a little bit, maybe bring down our midtones a tad. Once again, kind of A/B that. And, maybe a little bit more. See how that looks. Okay, now that's feeling pretty good. So this is before and this is after. Okay, pretty subtle effect, but putting that over top of our entire video is just going to help kind of pull things together real subtly. So now that we have that done, we've got our kind of finishing LUTs on there and our film grain on there. The next step is to check your video for the medium that it's going to be presented on. So here's the thing with color grading, and this is probably one of the trickiest parts of color grading, is you go in, you spend all this time getting your color right, you work on just like perfecting it. It's amazing. You love how it looks. And then what happens is you export it out of Premiere and you open it up on your computer and the color looks totally different. And then you take that same video and you upload it to YouTube and you look at it in Chrome and it looks totally different. And then you go and you watch it on YouTube in Firefox and it looks totally different. You're getting my point here. The reality is that you're going to get your color perfect just the way you want it. Everybody's going to be watching your video on a different screen, on a different device, and all of those screens and devices and browsers all have different ways of rendering color. It's just kind of part of the game as a colorist. It's the same thing with audio engineering. You know, you spend so much time getting the mix and the master perfect so it sounds perfect on your studio reference monitors, and then people just end up listening to it on a phone, right? And so it's just kind of part of the deal as a colorist, and it's something you have to deal with, but there are ways to kind of mitigate the issues, and I'm going to show you that here. So the best thing that you can do to try and get it as good as possible, because you're never going to be able to get it perfect on every platform. It's always going to look different. But to get it as good as possible is to think about where this video is going to be. So if it's a video that is you're planning to put it on YouTube, then that's great. If it's a video that's going to go on a TV, then that would be different. Go and put it on that platform or that device, and then from there, make adjustments to get it right. So this video, for example, I already exported a snippet of it to show you guys what it looks like. If I open it up in my Finder on the Mac, you'll notice that the color is quite a bit different. See how pale he looks? It feels a little bit desaturated, feels like it maybe lost a little bit of its contrast, and it just doesn't look good. Like I got my color looking exactly how I want it here, and then I export it, and now it doesn't look good. And then I took the same video and I actually uploaded it to YouTube, so you can see that as well. And you notice that on YouTube it's looking a little bit better. It's got some of the saturation back, at least as compared to this, but it's still desaturated, still doesn't quite look right like how we want it to look. So because this is a video that's going to go on YouTube, what I'm going to do is upload this piece to YouTube just like I have, and then make adjustments from here. So I can look at it and say, well, I noticed that there's, it's missing a little bit of saturation, and it's missing maybe just a hair of contrast. So what I'm going to do is go back into Premiere, and I'm going to create a new adjustment layer. Again, we'll throw this over top of the entire video like that, and then go to our clip here, and I'm just going to add those adjustments. So we'll go into Lumetri in my basic correction, and I'm just going to add a little bit of saturation. Really not very much, like maybe we put this at like 110. It's going to look way too intense right here, obviously, because it's more than it needs to be, but we're going to do that, and then we're going to add, just the tiniest bit of contrast to get it right. And then I will export this again, upload it to YouTube, compare them, make sure that it looks good, and then make any further adjustments if I need to again. Now, you're never going to be able to get it perfect, but this is the best way that I know of to get your video looking as best as possible on the medium that you're planning to view it on. If you were going to be putting this on a TV, let's say it was playing like at an exhibition or a show or something like this, and they had a big flat screen TV at their booth for your client, then you would want to take it and put it on the TV that it's going to be played on, and then adjust from there. Or put it on any TV would be better than nothing at all. Okay, so that's the last step in the finishing process. So there you go. There's 3 ways to finish off your color before exporting. Basically, the goal of this is we want to preserve your color and make it look as best as it possibly can when you're exporting it. Since you spend so much time just trying to get the color right and trying to tell your story, we definitely want to preserve that. So hope that was helpful. If you have any questions about this, feel free to let me know. Okay, in this video, we're going to talk about how to match 2 different cameras. There's going to be situations that you'll find yourself in where you're shooting with 2 different cameras. Maybe it's an A shot and a B shot, or maybe you're shooting an interview and you've got 2 shots. You got the wide angle, the close-up angle of your person. And you're, because they're 2 different cameras, even if they're the same model of camera, sometimes the settings are just slightly different, or some, things can get a little bit messed up. But especially if you're shooting with 2 different cameras, sometimes, you need to do a little match in post in order to make the cameras look the same, so that when you're cutting back and forth between them, there's no discrepancies there. So I've got an interview here that I shot on 2 different cameras, and this is our A camera, was our wide shot. This was shot on the red Scarlett W, and then this was our B shot, our close-up, which was shot on a Red Raven. So the Scarlett W is my camera, and then I needed a second camera for this, so I went and rented the Red Raven for it. You would think that because both cameras come from Red and they have the same sensor in them, that they would look identical, but there's always little things that are going to happen here and there. You're shooting with different lenses, different cameras. They might be calibrated differently. They might, for whatever reason, you end up with 2 shots that look a little bit different. So you'll notice that this shot is a little more green and warm, whereas this shot feels a little bit more magenta, not quite as yellow. So we're going to go ahead and match these 2 shots. Now, there's this really cool tool in Premiere called the Color Match tool, which is going to make our life so much easier when it comes to doing this. In Final Cut, there's a similar tool called Match Color that you can use to select another image from your scene or from your media pool. Just match the color to that. And then in DaVinci Resolve, it also works the same way. You just right-click on the clip that you want to match, click on Shot Match to this clip. So what we're going to do is going to take this clip that we want to adjust, which is this second clip, the B cam. We want to actually adjust it and match it to this one. So we're going to take our B cam here and we're going to go to color match. We'll go ahead and pull up our comparison view. And over here is the clip that we are changing. And then over here, you've got a slider that you can slide along your video and find the clip that you want to match it to. So we select this because we want to match it to this one, and we go ahead and just click Apply Match. It's going to take a second to analyze the image, and then you'll notice it's made the adjustment. Now, obviously, it's not perfect, and it is going to need a little bit of adjustment, but it is going to help us kind of go the right direction and get off to a good start. So I'm noticing here that we've got, our blacks are a little bit too black, so our shadows are too dark, and then our green is a little bit intense in the background here. It's not quite that intense in this one. And I imagine the reason why it did the shadows like this is because his legs aren't visible in this shot. So when it's matching to this, it's taking this black level, even though this black level isn't present in this clip. So all we need to do is adjust our shadows here. So I'm going to bring my shadows back up and just go even a little bit too far, and then use our mid-tones, bring them back down to kind of compensate for that. And I'm just looking back and forth between our clip here and this clip over here to just kind of match these so that they are similar. So we'll kind of go about right there, maybe increase the blacks a little bit more. We want to get it as close as possible. So about right there, maybe a little bit more. About right there, as far as exposure goes, is feeling pretty good to me. Now, the second thing that we need to look at is the color. So there's a little bit too much green in this image. So you notice that the color match tool over here has pushed quite a bit of green into the midtones and the shadows and the highlights. I'm going to adjust that and just kind of dial it back a little bit. So I'm going to grab my midtones and just push them back up towards red or magenta to kind of get rid of a little bit of that green in it. Again, I'm just looking back and forth between our clip here and the reference clip. And about right there is pretty good. I'm going to do the same thing with the shadows, just slightly. Obviously, I don't want to go too far. It's going to start looking wrong, but we want to just adjust it. You're using your eyes to do this and just see, where does it feel natural. So maybe about right there. And then same thing with our highlights. I don't think they need as much adjustment, but maybe right there. And so there we go. Now we've got two clips that look pretty well matched, and we could do the interview and cut back and forth between these and probably wouldn't have any issues. So let's move on to another one that's a little bit more advanced, maybe a little bit more complicated. So in this one, we've got our shot of a guy. It's another interview. This is our B cams, our close-up shot, and then we've got our wide angle here. You notice that the wide angle looks a lot better. We've got this kind of colored a little bit where we want it. And so we want to match this B cam to this. These are both Canon cameras. I believe they were both C200s. Might have been C300s. This was a few years ago, so I can't remember exactly, but that's what we're using here. And you'll notice that they look, just a little bit different. So we want to match to this clip, and we want to change this clip. So I'm going to select this clip. I'm going to go into comparison view, and then just drag my slider over here until we find the clip that we want to match to, which is this one. So I'll go ahead and click Apply Match. It's going to analyze the clip, and it's going to apply the match. Now you can see that it actually got it pretty close, and we're off to a really good start here. So there's just a few adjustments that we need to make. So let's turn off comparison. Actually, let's leave comparison view on so we can make the comparison. So I'm going to keep this clip selected. And the first thing that I'm noticing is that our lamps are a little bit different color. So over here, we've got a little bit of a yellow lamp, and this one is feeling a little more orange. So I'm going to go into my curves and just try to select that color. So use the eyedropper tool. Click on the lamp, and that's the color that we're working with. I'm going to just increase that and change the hue of it just ever so slightly until it turns about the right color. That's looking really good. Now they're matched. Those are the same color. The other thing that I'm noticing is that his jacket is a little bit of a different color. So in this clip, his jacket feels a little more magenta. Even though it's gray, it's kind of got a magenta tint to it. And this one feels a little bit more green. I want to match to this. So I'm going to take the eyedropper again, select his jacket, and then take that color and just you know, slightly increase it so that it feels more similar. As always, don't want to go too far, not trying to make it actually green. We're just kind of taking a little bit of that magenta out of it. So let's see, from there to, you know, maybe about right there feels natural, and I may want to desaturate it a little bit. So I'm going to go up to my saturation curves and just use the desaturation about like that. That is feeling pretty similar, maybe a little too green. Okay, so now those are similar. Now the last thing that we need to look at are his skin tones. So you'll notice that his skin tones in this image feel a little bit more green, whereas these ones feel a little bit more magenta. It's a little subtle change, but I wanna fix that. Now the issue with this, and the reason why I can't use curves for this, is because I'm already using curves to adjust the lamp, and there's other warm tones in this image that I don't want to affect. In fact, I think I'm already affecting the skin tones a little bit, so I might take this. I'm going to take this and increase it a lot to see what I'm affecting and find out really where that lamp is on this spectrum. So where it starts to get really purple, that's the lamp right there, and I'm just going to narrow this so I'm only affecting the lamp as much as possible. So about right there. Now obviously it's impossible to get this perfect, but at least we are getting as good as we can. So we'll put that back to where we wanted it, you know, kind of orange like that. That's just to make sure that I'm not affecting too much of this couch and too much of his skin tones as well. Now since we're already using the curves here to adjust the lamp, I'm going to go into up here at the top, and I'm going to click Add Lumetri Color Effect. So I'm going to add a separate instance of Lumetri that's a clean one, and I'll show you why in a second. And you can do that in Final Cut as well. You can add a new color correction in DaVinci Resolve. You can just add a new node. And so I'm going to go into my secondary controls here and just select his skin tones. So if I go in, I click on Select Skin Tones. I'll use this plus dropper to kind of drag around and get a good range. And you'll notice as I select those, in fact, I'm going to come in here and get some of the shadows as well. As I select those skin tones, there's a lot of other stuff that is being selected in the image. So I will adjust this as best as I can to get, you know, kind of get more of what I want, less of what I don't want. So just to kind of eliminate some of that background stuff as much as I can. And I actually can do quite a bit just like this. Okay, so we're only getting his skin tones. We'll go ahead and blur that out a little bit so we don't get any hard lines. And then I'm going to take those skin tones and try to match them. So they're feeling a little bit green on this one. We want them to be a little bit more magenta. So I'm just going to take this color wheel and push it towards magenta just a little bit towards red. Yeah, just kind of push our colors there a little bit so they're a little bit more matched like that. Now you notice that this affected some of this chair and some of this couch in the background as well, and we don't really want that to happen. So what I'm going to do, and the reason why I created a separate instance of Lumetri, is now I can come over here to Lumetri and I can create a mask. So I'm going to add a mask to this. Let's go back to our color wheels here and turn off comparison view so we can see this. So we're going to add a mask to this Lumetri instance and then move it around so that it only affects whatever the mask is over. So you notice that that is more orange, and then that gets rid of it. And I can take this and just put it over his face. And then I will take the feather and just feather it up so we don't have like a hard transition. Because this is an interview and he's not moving around or anything, the camera's not moving, I can get away with this because his face is always going to stay within this zone. So now if we go back and turn that off and compare the two, then we can go back and forth. All right, so I'm looking at the color now, and you know we've made those adjustments and got them all set up. However, this image now, when we turn on comparison view, is starting to feel a little bit too warm and a little bit too magenta compared to this one. So we need to go back and make some adjustments. And this is mostly happening, I think, because of this curves adjustment right here. So if I turn that off, then we're getting some of our normal colors back. So let's go ahead and tweak this just a little bit. So we've got some things happening here when we're adjusting this lamp, and it's just affecting the whole image a little bit too much. And what we may have to do In fact, I think we're going to have to, because this is affecting too much of the couch and everything. We really want to leave the couch exactly how it is and just change the lamp. I'm going to do one more lumetri effect and just change that lamp. So I'm going to do a curves adjustment on that lamp, put it back. That's going to affect the whole image. And then we'll go ahead and on this third one, I will add a mask. So I'll take a mask and just put it around that one lamp. Like that. Again, because it's a static shot and it's not moving, I don't have to track this to the lamp or anything like that. So I can put that mask around it and then go back to our mask controls and feather that again. And then now let's go back and take a look. So for the most part, I think we're looking pretty good. I may adjust just little exposure things here and there, maybe adjust the exposure of the image just a little bit. But overall, we're getting an image that is pretty well matched to our reference clip. So that was a little bit more advanced one. Sometimes you might have to go in and do a little bit more like specific colors and changing different objects and things like that. But whatever you have to do, you can get those colors matched. So there you go. There's a quick video on how to match cameras whenever you're shooting something that's like dialogue scene or an interview like this or a series of interviews and you want them to be matched. This is how you're going to go through the process, using that color match tool in order to get you started, and then just going through and using all of the color grading tools that we've talked about in this section to just make little adjustments to your image and get it looking really good. All right, so we made it to the color grading section. In this section, we're going to be teaching you how to color grade your films. Now, color grading is basically the process you go through of tweaking the color, making changes to brightness, contrast, saturation, changing colors, just adjusting the color of your films to make it look more interesting and more appealing, to bring your colors into harmony and make them work really well together. This is kind of the final process that you go through in order to make your films look polished and to make them more interesting and more cinematic. So before we jump into actually how to color grade and use the tools and everything, it's important to understand and take a look at color theory. Now, understanding color theory is important because color theory will kind of dictate what you do and why certain things look good, why certain colors go well together and others don't. And so going into this is going to help you to understand why you're using certain colors and how you can use the color of your film to tell your story better. Now, when it comes down to it, color grading is not just about throwing a filter on your video that makes it look cool or cinematic. It's really about storytelling. It's really about using color to help push the narrative of the piece that you're creating and better tell that story. So let's jump into it. So the first most basic concept to understand in color theory is the color wheel. Now the color wheel is a model that is used to understand color and how different colors interact with each other. This was a model that was invented a long time ago, but still used today in art and film and any kind of, design or whatever, anything that uses color. And so on the color wheel, at its most basic, you have your primary colors, which are red, yellow, and blue, of course. Red, yellow, and blue, the primary colors, are the three colors that can't be created by mixing other colors together. So you can't mix two other colors to create red. Red just simply exists. Secondary colors are the colors that are created when you mix primary colors. So if you take red and blue and put them together, you get magenta or violet. If you put red and yellow together, you get orange. And if you put yellow and blue together, you get green. So purple, green, and orange are all secondary colors. And then tertiary colors are the colors that are created when you mix secondary colors. So for example, if you take blue and green and mix them together, you'll end up with teal, which is a tertiary color. Now, all of this is fine and dandy, but it doesn't really mean anything unless we understand where color comes from. So let's answer the question of what is color? Well, in terms of color grading, a color is essentially just a combination of three different values on the color wheel. Those values are hue, saturation, and intensity. As you adjust those values on the color wheel, you'll end up with different colors. So hue is the actual color that you're working with. So as you move around the color wheel, you change the hue. Hue is like green, blue, orange, yellow, purple. Those are hues. Saturation is kind of the intensity of the color, if you will. Saturation is a measure of how much gray is in the color. So if you turn the saturation all the way down on a color, you'll end up with gray. If you turn the saturation all the way up, you'll end up with a color that is really rich and vibrant. And intensity is the lightness or darkness of the color. Now, each of these three values are independent of each other, so when you increase the intensity of a color, you're not actually changing the saturation or the hue, and vice versa. So if you look at the color wheels in your color grading software, when you select a color and you're changing that color or modifying that color, as you move around the color wheel, you'll be changing the hue of the color. As you move out towards the edge of the color wheel, you are increasing the amount of saturation in the color, and then the intensity is usually controlled by a slider that is next to or below the color wheel. So when we get into color grading, we're going to be using these different values of color in order to select different colors in our scene and then modify them to make them look the way that we want. Next, let's get into color harmony. Color harmony is basically the concept that different colors work well together and other colors maybe don't work as well together. And different colors, when they are combined with other colors, can create different moods or feelings depending on what you use. Now, there's kind of a spectrum of color harmony, and it basically ranges from what I'll call boring to chaos. So on one end of the spectrum, in color harmony, you'll have just a red square. It's only red, there's no other color there. It's going to be basically in perfect harmony, but it's also going to be kind of boring. So adding some variation in that red is what's going to make it a little bit more interesting. So for example, if you add another color to your red square like green, then you'd end up with two complementary colors that are really harmonious with each other and work really well, and they also create a certain vibe or emotion. Now, if you start adding too many colors or emphasizing too many colors in your film when you're color grading, it'll start to descend into what kind of feels more like chaos. So you want to make sure that you are keeping your color grading simple and only working with or emphasizing only a handful of colors, or even down to maybe even just one color in your films, to keep it more harmonious and simple. Otherwise, if things start to get too crazy, it can start to feel chaotic. So when it comes to combining colors in your color grading, let's talk about three of the most popular color combinations or color schemes that you'll work with. The first one is analogous. Analogous basically means you're using colors that are next to each other on the color wheel. So if you have a scene that is blue and teal, that would be an analogous color scheme. For example, if you look at a movie like Blade Runner, you'll notice that some of the scenes are very orange and it's only different tones and shades of the color orange. This is a monochromatic or analogous color scheme. Or for example, The Matrix, when things start to turn green, you'll notice that there's a combination of green and then greenish pink kind of skin tones, which are also right next to each other on the color wheel, which makes this an analogous color scheme as well. The second most popular color scheme is complementary. And complementary are colors that are across from each other on the color wheel. So the most popular example of this is in major blockbusters like Transformers, where they use lots of teal and orange. The teal is right across the color wheel from orange, and so you get a complementary color scheme. Another example is from the movie Amélie, which is a really good example of complementary colors, but different than teal and orange because it used a primarily red and green color palette, which are also across the color wheel from each other and complementary colors. And third is split complementary, which is kind of a combination between analogous and complementary. Split complementary gives you two colors that are analogous or right next to each other on the color wheel, and then you use another color that's across the color wheel from those two colors. So for example, in this scene, you can see that the dominant colors are red, green, and teal. The green and teal are analogous and right next to each other on the color wheel, and red is on the opposite end of the color wheel, making it complementary, which makes this color scheme a split complementary scheme. So now that you know about the color wheel and different color combinations or color schemes, well, how does this apply to color grading? Well, when you're working on a clip, you can choose one of these color schemes in order to adjust the way that you create your color. So for example, on this clip, I could go one of many different ways with it. So if I wanted to take this clip and turn it into an analogous color scheme, I could adjust the colors so they're pushing towards one side of the color wheel. So we already have some nice warm tones on the beach here, in the sand and the dirt. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the blue in the mountains and the water and push them a little bit more towards green, which pushes them towards that yellow color, and then also push the green in the trees towards a more warm color. as I kind of make these adjustments and turn down the saturation of some of the blues and other colors that would normally be across the color wheel from the warm, it ends up creating an analogous color scheme. Now on the flip side, if I wanted to take this same clip and do a complementary color scheme, well then in that case I would try to accent the blues in the water and also accent the orange and warmer tones in the ground, because those are complementary colors. So I'm going to push the blue in the mountains a little bit towards teal so we get a nice teal effect, and then I'm going to push the warmer colors a little bit more towards orange and saturate them a little bit in order to create that color contrast between those two complementary colors. Now, if I desaturate the trees in the background, which are green, then we end up with two dominant colors in this clip, which are the teal and orange, which makes it complementary. If I wanted to turn this into a split complementary color scheme, all I would have to do is increase the saturation of the trees, which adds green as a more dominant color, which turns it into split complementary. The reason is because the trees are now green and the mountains and the water are now teal, which are analogous colors, and then the ground and the skin tones are more warm orangish colors, which are causing the complementary to the two analogous colors, making it a split complementary scheme. Now, it's important to keep in mind that creating the right color scheme in your video is not entirely your job as a colorist. Most of that actually happens when you're shooting. And it's important to remember that color grading starts in front of the camera. It starts when you make decisions like locations and set design and wardrobe choices and props that you use. By putting colors in your scene that complement the wardrobe or complement the location that you're working in, you're already starting to develop a color palette, and that's really the job of the director and the DP or whoever is shooting the film. When it comes to color grading, there's really only so much you can do to push colors a little bit or adjust them. You really can't do any wild adjustments without causing all sorts of artifacts or other things happening in your image. So if you're somebody who's shooting your own videos and color grading them, it's something to really keep in mind while you're shooting is how are you going to color this film in post, and be paying attention to that as you're setting up your shot. So there you go. There's a quick primer on basic color theory. Again, it's important to understand this because these things are going to guide your decisions throughout the rest of this process, so you know what to do, why you're doing it, and how to create colors that are visually appealing and will make your images look beautiful. In the next few videos, we're going to go into the actual color grading workflow and how to use the tools so that you can take this theory and put it into practice. Okay, so the first step in any color grading workflow is color correction. Color correction is where you're going to take your footage straight out of camera and just start correcting it. Basically just fixing any maybe minor issues that you had while shooting. Maybe some things weren't quite the right color. Maybe you had some exposure issues, de-logging your footage, just fixing little inconsistencies that might have happened while shooting, and just getting your footage all set up and ready to color grade and get into the actual creative part of the process. So I've got a clip here that is in log, and this is from a commercial that I DP'd. And basically I'm going to go through the color correction process with you and show you how it works. So the first thing that we need to do is de-log this footage. That basically means bringing it back from a log profile, which as you can see looks really flat and desaturated, which a lot of your consumer and prosumer and even professional cameras will shoot in log. And so if you're shooting in log, you'll need to de-log your footage first. If you're not shooting in log, you don't need to worry about that. If it's in log, we basically just need to add back the contrast and the saturation that we lost from having it in log. So we can do that over here in our basic correction panel. And I'm going to just start going through and adjusting some of these things. So for example, our contrast, we may need to bring that up. And then our saturation, we can increase as well to a normal level. And then I might adjust maybe some of the shadows need to be a little bit darker and the whites need to come up a little bit. So you can kind of adjust shadows, highlights, whites, blacks, everything here to get it to about the right level, about where you want it. Now up here above all of our exposure corrections, we also have a white balance correction. So that's our temperature and tint. So temperature is going to control how warm or cool the image is. Tint is going to control how green or magenta the image is. Now, the method that I like to use to get these right is what I call the back and forth technique. And that basically means just moving your sliders back and forth until it feels right. So what I'll do is I'll take my slider and go really far to the right, and notice how that's way too warm. And then I'll come really back far to the left and notice how it's way too cool. And then I'll just keep bouncing back and forth between too warm, too cool, too warm, too cool, too warm, too cool, and just make it smaller and smaller and smaller until I land on a setting about right there. Okay, so that's a natural looking color. And then I'll do the same thing with the tint. So that's too magenta, that's too green. We'll just kind of go back and forth between magenta and green until we settle on a color that looks natural. And you'll notice that I landed at about 6.1. So that's giving us a pretty well corrected image. Now, another way you can do this is on your white balance correction here, you should have an eyedropper tool that you can use to select something in the scene that is white. And if you do that, it will automatically do the white balance for you. So in this scene, the sweater that the girl is wearing here is kind of white. It's pretty close. It's kind of like an off-white, a little bit more creamy color than white, but we're going to use that and just kind of adjust from there and see what we get. So if I click on the color dropper tool and then I just click anywhere on her jacket, it's going to give me a color correction. Now you'll notice that it went a little bit cooler than what I did when I was doing my adjustments. That's because the jacket is not perfectly white. So if you want to be technical about this and get it really accurate, you'll want to shoot with a white card. You can put a white card in front of the camera before you start shooting. And then when you come into your color grade, you can just click on that white card and it'll give you your white balance automatically. Now, since it gave me a little bit cooler image, since that's kind of a cream colored shirt, I'll just adjust that warmth back a little bit. And then now we've got a nicely color corrected image. Now, the easiest way to do delogging if you are shooting in log is to use a LUT. Now, we'll talk about LUTs in another video, so I'm not going to go into it right now. However, you'll notice here at the top of the basic correction panel, we do have an input LUT option. Basically, every camera manufacturer creates log profiles that you can use and LUTs that you can use to convert those log profiles back to a standard color format. So if you go online and Google your camera and look for a log conversion LUT to Rec 709, for example, you should be able to find one that will delog the footage for you automatically. So if I reset all of these settings and I choose one, I don't have one specifically for my camera, but I'll just choose kind of one of the default ones from like an Arri camera, for example. This is, Alexa's default log C to Rec 709. It's a conversion LUT. If I add that on, you notice that it brings back the contrast and the saturation automatically, and then I don't have to do all these other adjustments. I can just kind of adjust my colors and my image from there. Now, if you're shooting on a cinema camera or something that shoots in RAW, you're going to have a little bit of a different workflow. Since those cameras record all of that data as metadata and you can change it in your camera, then you don't have to really worry about adding a LUT onto it. So let me go ahead and delete this LUT and reset everything that we did here. In that case, what we would do is you'd go back to the master effect controls for that clip and change the gamma curve from log to gamma. That's going to give you back the normal gamma curve that was meant to be the way it was when you shot it. Then from there, you can go back into your color panel and start making adjustments to the image to get it exactly how you want. So you may want to adjust the color temperature or the tint a little bit to get the color that you want. And then you can do the same thing for your highlights and shadows, whites and blacks, and just keep adjusting the image until you get it right where you like it. All right, so that is the color correction process. Again, this is the first thing you want to do. You want to do this on every single clip in your timeline to make sure that they're all corrected and make sure that they're all consistent as well. So for example, if you're working on an interview that has two different cameras, you want to make sure that those cameras are matched and they look good together. Or let's say you're working on a commercial and each scene has a few different clips. You want to take all of the shots from that scene and match them together so that they're similar. And then when you go into the color grading process and you start getting creative with it, it'll translate a lot easier from clip to clip. So there you go. If you have questions about that, feel free to let me know. If not, let's go ahead and move on to the next video. All right, so now that we have the image color corrected and ready to go, all natural looking and ready for the creative process, we're gonna jump into actually color grading this and doing the creative part of the grading process. So I've got our image here all corrected and ready to go, delogged, and it's ready. And I'm gonna jump into and show you a few of the different tools that you're gonna use to color grade your video. Now, the color grading process is different from the color correction process, where correction is all about just correcting it. Well, just fixing it, making sure that everything is normal and natural. Color grading is where you get into the creative part of the process, where you get to kind of tweak your colors and change it based on your color schemes or the mood that you're going for. And not just the colors, but also the exposure. So there's a lot you can do here. And so I'm just going to walk you through some of these tools. Now, the first tool is going to be your curves tool. There's two different types of curves. There's RGB curves, and then there's hue saturation curves. So first I'm going to talk about the RGB curves. This right here is an RGB curve, and basically we have the ability to set the exposure of our image based on midtones, shadows, highlights, different exposure areas of the image, and then we can also change the red, green, and blue levels. Now, honestly, I don't use RGB curves that much when I'm color grading. I find that the other tools are easier to use and allow me to get what I need. However, it is a tool that you should know how to use just in case there's a situation that comes up where you do need it. So basically in the RGB curves, we've got a line here, and this is indicating where our shadows are here at the bottom and where our highlights are here at the top. And any adjustment to this line up or down will increase or decrease the exposure. So for example, if we wanted to increase our midtones, we could click on it to create a point in the middle and then drag that point up, and that will increase our midtones. Likewise, we could do the exact same thing in the shadows. We could lift our shadows to make them brighter or darken them to make them darker. Now at the bottom, we've got our black point. So you can use this to set the black point of your image. If you wanted kind of a faded, matted look in your blacks, you could use that, and we'll bring this to kind of bring that back to normal. You can use that to create, this kind of effect, you know what I mean? And then you can do the same thing with your highlights to bring them down. Now, what a lot of people will do is in the correction part of the process, they will bring their blacks until they hit black, and then they'll bring their highlights across until they hit white. I don't do that. I don't think that it's even necessary. I think that you can just use this tool as needed in order to get the look that you want. So that will adjust your exposure across the board. Now you can do the same thing with your red, green, and blue channels. So for example, the red channel, I could just increase it in the midtones, or I could increase it in the shadows. Okay, whoops. That's way too far. Or I can increase it in the shadows. So you can do all sorts of creative color effects. Notice how just by adjusting the red channel in my image, I've already kind of created a semi color graded, it's a very unique, pretty heavy effect, but an effect nonetheless, kind of a vintage looking effect. So you can adjust how much red there is in your highlights, midtones, and shadows, and then you can do the same thing with your greens and your blues. Again, like I said, I don't use RGB curves that much, but it is good to know how they work. The curves that I more often use are these hue saturation curves, and these are the ones that really allow you to dial in and focus on specific colors. So where RGB curves will let you adjust the red, green, and blue channels of a specific range of exposure values in your image, so like your midtones, your shadows, your highlights, the hue saturation curves will allow you to select specific color ranges. As you can see here, there are quite a few different hue saturation curves here, and each of them does a little bit different things. So this first one is hue versus saturation, where it says hue versus sat here. Okay, what this is doing is it allows you to select a color in your image and then change the saturation of that color. So for example, if I wanted to select the blue in the background here, I could just select a range of blue values and then increase the saturation of those. So if I select this eyedropper tool at the top here, and then I click on that back wall, you'll notice it's going to give me 3 points. And this is going to allow me to draw a curve here to increase the saturation. So if I increase the saturation of this middle point, you'll notice that the wall gets more saturated. Now I can also adjust these endpoints out to select a wider range of colors, which I usually want to do because when I use the eyedropper tool, it's only selecting that specific color that I clicked on. And so I maybe want to select more blues than that. And you'll notice how I can increase or decrease the saturation of that blue, but it's not affecting the rest of the image or any other colors. So that's hue versus saturation. The next one is hue versus hue. This will allow you to select any hue or any color and then change the color of that color. So if we go back and select this blue again, and I'll widen this out so we get a little bit more range here. Basically what I can do is change the hue of it or move it around the color wheel to change the color of that part. So as I push this up, you'll notice it'll go towards green, it'll go towards kind of an orange color there, and I can change the color of that wall. Same thing if I pull it back down, it's going to go back the other direction, so more towards purple and eventually red as well. So you can use that to adjust the color of an object or the color of a specific color in the scene. And that's going to select everything in the scene that is that blue color. The hue versus luma, as you could probably guess, allows you to select a hue and change the luminance or the intensity of it, so lighter or darker. And then there's a couple down here that are not used as often, but still valuable. This is luma versus saturation. So for example, you can select a specific luminance or intensity value. So let's say I wanted to change the saturation of only the shadows in the image. And this is where I use this the most often, is sometimes what I'll do is I'll bring all of my shadows down. This is changing the saturation of just the shadows, and I'll adjust it so that only my shadows are desaturated and everything else is normal saturation. What this can do is just make sure that there's no like green or blue cast happening in your shadows if that's kind of the effect that you want to go for. And then the last one is saturation versus saturation. I can select a range of colors that are a certain level of saturated and then change the saturation of those colors. So for example, if I wanted to desaturate anything that is saturated beyond, 50%, I could bring this down so that anything that is overly saturated just kind of brings it back to normal. Again, these are a little bit more niche tools that aren't used as often, but they can be used in different ways. So for example, if I were using the curves here and trying to adjust this image, let's say, for example, I wanted to go for kind of a complementary color scheme in this image. Well, the first thing I would do is decide which colors I'm going to go complementary with. And in this case, we've got a lot of warm tones or orange tones, and we also have a lot of blue tones. And so I want to separate those colors and create that color contrast. So what I'm going to do, first of all, is start with the guy's jacket because it's blue, but it's kind of a magenta blue, and I want to push it a little bit more towards teal. So I'm going to use the eyedropper here and select his jacket, which is going to give me a general range of values that I'm working with here, and then just kind of adjust that to where I want. Obviously, I can push it way too far. I can get these kind of colored effects, but I just want to see where I am affecting it the most. And it looks like it's actually about right there. So I'm going to spread this out a little bit more, which makes sense because it was kind of a magenta blue. And then, nope, I went too far. Got to come back a little bit. Then I can take that jacket and adjust the color of it. So I don't want to go too far. I just want to take it from this kind of magenta looking blue and push it into a little bit more of the teal range about right there. And then likewise, I'll grab the exact same range up here on my saturation curves and just increase the saturation of that color. Except in this case, I also want to include the wall behind him. So I'm just going to adjust this endpoint over so that I'm increasing the saturation of the wall behind him and his jacket and making that pop out a little bit more. Okay, then next I want to adjust the warm tones, or the orange tones. So I'll go ahead and select an area down here that looks like it's about right and adjust my hue. Notice I can push this really far and change the colors, all sorts of directions. I just want to take this, which is kind of yellow looking, and just push it just slightly towards red, which is going to make it a little bit more orange. That's going to create just a little more contrast between the blue and the orange. So just slightly that direction, not too far. And then it's feeling a little bit too intense, so I might come up here to my saturation curve and just desaturate it a little bit. Do some little adjustments here, and we're getting a fairly good image. Now, obviously, I could spend a lot of time going through and tweaking this and getting it just right, but you can see how we're getting kind of a more complementary color scheme by doing this. So if I go before, this was the before, and then this was the after. Pretty subtle effect. Now, likewise, we could do the opposite, and we could go for an analogous color scheme. So for example, maybe I wanted to push everything kind of towards those warm tones and create kind of a more warm, inviting atmosphere. Then I would do something different with the blues. So for example, let's go ahead and grab the blue from his jacket again, kind of widen this out so we're affecting all of the blues in the image, because the blue is across the color wheel from the warm or the orange. We want to kind of subdue the blues and push everything towards that warm. So what I'm going to do is take this blue and I'm going to push it quite a bit towards green. Okay. As we push it that direction, in fact, I don't want to affect the back wall as much. So I'm going to adjust this way. And I'm going to push both of those colors quite a bit more towards green. So green is right next to yellow and orange on the color wheel. So if we can go towards green, then we're moving all of our colors towards a more analogous color scheme because they're right next to each other. Now, obviously the effect is a little bit intense, and so we want to take that same range up here on our saturation curve and just desaturate it. So as we pull that saturation down, kind of adjust it here to get it in the right spot. Now you can see that we're getting an image where that blue doesn't pop out as much, and it's creating more of a warm orange kind of analogous color scheme. Okay, so that's how I use the curves tools to adjust my image. So let me just reset all of this, and then we'll talk about the next tool. So the next tool is the color wheels tool, and this is where a lot of your exposure in color grading comes from. Most exposure, like if you look at professional colorists, will do a lot of that in the color wheels. So the color wheels here will allow me to adjust my shadows, my midtones, and my highlights independently, but it'll allow me to change the exposure of each of those, but it'll also allow me to push any color I want into those. So unlike the RGB curves, which only allows you to increase or decrease the red, green, and blue channels, this will allow me to push any color towards any color. So the first thing I'm going to do is start with my exposure tools, which are over here on the left, these sliders. This is where a lot of the creative exposure comes in. Now, what a lot of filmmakers will do, we kind of have this idea that you want to add contrast to your images, especially when they're shooting in log profiles. And so what they'll do immediately is start, bringing down the shadows and getting, their black point until it hits black. And then they'll bring up their midtones so that it's, exposed properly. And then they'll bring up their highlights to just kind of, make sure that it's clean. What happens when you do this and when you adjust your images this way is that you end up with this kind of gritty, very contrasty, very stark contrast image. And it's really not what you want. This is, in fact, one of the biggest mistakes I see with color grading from beginners is this kind of contrasty look that ends up looking really bad. So if I reset that, I'm going to show you an alternate way of doing this. And this is what I do on most of my images. So when I'm color grading this, I want to create a look that feels very natural and filmic and has that cinematic film-like look to it. Now, what a lot of filmmakers will do is when they want that film look, or the film look, they will go into like their creative tab here and just add this faded film effect, right? Which kind of brings up that black point, mats your blacks like that, and it looks really pretty bad. Or they'll go up to basic correction and just increase their blacks, which essentially does the same thing. The problem with doing this is that even though it's kind of like the trendy look, or has become that, it seems, it really starts to muddy out your blacks and you start to lose detail in those blacks, and it really, really looks bad. So to create that same effect in a more natural way is to use your color wheels. So rather than bringing your shadows down and your midtones up, what we're going to do is actually do the opposite. We're going to bring the midtones down and the shadows up. We're going to start squeezing those two together to get the look that we want. So if I start bringing my midtones down until it's looking pretty dark, then I can bring the shadows up to kind of compensate for it. And then look what happens. Now we end up with this really nice, natural, muted look. Feels very filmic and cinematic, but we're not losing all of this nice detail in our shadows. Now, if I were to push this effect really far, you can really see what it's doing. So I'll bring my midtones all the way down and then bring those shadows up to compensate. Notice how we're just really starting to smush those midtones and shadows together, and it's creating that really cool effect. Now, if you wanted to shoot something that, it made sense to go like this far with the effect on it, then go for it, be my guest. But this is going to be further than I'm usually going to go on something like this. So I'll bring my shadows back down until they're just, maybe barely too dark, about like that, and then start bringing my midtones back up to adjust for it. And then you end up with a really nice, pleasing image that just feels natural, but that also has kind of a muted, cinematic, filmic look. Now, the last thing with the color wheels that I was talking about is you can push different colors into the shadows, midtones, or highlights in your image. So this is kind of a more stylized effect, but for example, let's say you wanted to push some blue into your shadows. So you would click here in the middle of the color wheel and just drag it slightly towards blue. Now I'm going to go really far so you can see exactly what that's doing, but it's basically making all of my shadows feel blue. And I can move it around the color wheel to make it more green or teal, and adjust it like that. And then, hey, I could go into my midtones and push them the opposite direction to create kind of that teal and orange effect as well. And there we're getting a very vintage kind of looking effect, which tends to happen when you start pushing colors into shadows and midtones. But if that's something that you're going for in your image, then there you go. So if we do a before and after, this is our before shot, and then this is our after with those adjustments made. Now, it's important to keep in mind that color grading is a creative process. So you want to be thinking about what the story is that you're trying to tell. What are you trying to make happen? Obviously, we're thinking about color schemes and thinking about, different colors that are harmonious together, that make sense together. And we want to be combining those colors or separating them, creating color contrast with complementary colors. You want to be thinking about it in those terms, but then also be thinking about the story. Maybe there's an object in the scene that you need to stand out because it has a specific importance in the movie, unlike some other things in the scene. So you might make that pop out with a little bit more saturation or change the color of it. There's a lot of different ways you can use the color grading process to tell stories, to change the way that your viewer perceives the video that they're watching. So that's my color grading process with curves and color wheels. Again, there are so many possibilities and options for every single thing that you shoot. You can go any number of directions with the color and completely change the mood or the feel of the entire project. So feel free to play around with this. Mess around with it, try new things, try pushing colors into different places and seeing what kind of effects you get. And pay attention to the films that you love or commercials that you love. See what they're doing and pay attention to how they're kind of tweaking the colors and changing the direction, the hue, the saturation, the intensity of the colors that they're working with in the scene. Anyway, there you go. Hope that was helpful. If you have any questions about this, let me know and we'll see you on the next video. All right, in this video, we're going to be talking about using LUTs to color grade faster. Now, what is a LUT? A LUT is a lookup table. Basically, it's like a filter that you apply to your images to start off your color grade. Think of it like when you pull up a photo on your phone and you add a filter to it, or you're uploading something to Instagram, you put a filter on it and it changes all the colors and adds, some blue or some green or whatever. That's basically what a LUT does. So it's called a lookup table, and the reason is because it literally is a file that has a table of instructions that it gives to the image. So the LUT, when you put it on the image, the LUT says, hey, image, if you have any blue in your image, make it teal. If you have any orange, make it a little bit more red. If you have any midtones in this area, increase them a little bit. It's just a bunch of instructions that it gives, kind of like we did with the color grading when we were selecting different colors and adjusting the hue and the saturation or the intensity of them. That's essentially what a LUT is doing. And so it's taking that set of instructions and applying it to the image to give you a starting point for your color grade. And because of that, it makes it so that you can color grade a whole lot faster. Now there's two types of LUTs, utility LUTs and creative LUTs. Utility LUTs are like the delogging LUTs that we talked about in another video. So when you go to delog your footage, you might put a delogging LUT on it, which would be a utility LUT, which is going to take the image from a log format into a Rec 709 or some other standard format. You can also use utility LUTs to convert images from different color spaces or different gamma curves in order to, get them ready for a broadcast distribution or whatever. A creative LUT is different, where it does more of some of the creative stuff that we were doing in the last video. So a creative LUT will add kind of that filter effect to your image to give you a starting point for your grade. So for example, if I go in here into Premiere, you'll notice that I've got our image here and I can add an input LUT at the top here. This is the utility LUT that it's asking for. This is where we can take the image and we can convert it to something. So for example, if we were shooting on an Alexa and we had, we'd use their log profile, their log C profile, then this LUT would convert that to a Rec 709 standard. So the utility LUTs in here will help you to convert your image or get, whatever going when you're doing your basic correction or you're delogging your footage. Now for creative LUTs, we've got a panel down here which will allow us to choose a look for our image. Now, Premiere Pro and Final Cut both have lots of built-in LUTs. So in Premiere, you can just kind of click through them like this and see what they're going to do, how they're going to affect the image. You notice that each one does something different to the image with different colors. Some of them are monochrome. It just depends on what you want. And so you can click through and find one that you really like through here. You can also install third-party LUTs, so you don't have to use the ones that are built in. So if I go up here and I go to browse, I'll actually browse over here and find the ones that we've included in this course from Drew, and you can select any of these .cube files and add them to your image. So for example, I'll scroll down, I'll find, let's say this one, this Technicolor one, and I'll click open and add it to my image. Now you notice right off the bat, after adding this LUT, that it is kind of intense and there's a lot of color and a lot of saturation going on here. And this is gonna happen often with the LUTs that you're using. Sometimes they're gonna be a little bit too intense for the image that you're using. Sometimes they'll be a little bit less intense. This is because LUTs are meant to be a kind of one size fits all, where you can put them on lots of different types of images, but depending on the colors in your scene, you might get a different effect with it. And so the most important tool to keep in mind when you're working with LUTs is this intensity slider underneath it. So you can actually control the amount of LUT that gets applied to the image. So if I turn this all the way down to 0, I'll end up back with our original image. And then I can just kind of creep it up until it looks nice. So even though, you know, at 100% here, it looks really weird, I can pull that down and just bring it up to the level where I think it looks nice. And then we get a really nice color grade on our image without having to do basically anything. So when you're working with LUTs, it makes it a whole lot faster to get to a really good image right off the bat. This is really helpful for beginners. Even more intermediate colorists will use LUTs. I know I used them for a long time and continue to. Even now, I still use LUTs occasionally because it's just such a faster way to get to a really high quality, good looking colored image. And sometimes when you're color grading, you don't really know what to do or what to create out of your image, or how to get creative with it. And so LUTs will give you a really good starting point. You can flip through all sorts of different LUTs and see what effect they're giving, find one that you like, and then go from there. But that's the thing, when you're using LUTs, you should always use them as a starting point. So a LUT isn't meant to be, the final, you're done. No, you don't have to do anything else from here. What you'll end up doing is when you've got a LUT on your image, adjust the intensity, get it to about where you want it. And then from there, it gives you a good starting point from which you can start your color grade. So you can go into your curves and your color wheels adjustments and make adjustments to it. And maybe, for example, on this one, I feel like the blacks are still a little bit too harsh. And so I may go into my color wheels here and just do a little adjustment to the shadows here, kind of like we were doing before. And then do a little adjustment to my midtones to bring them back down. Let's see, about right there. And that's feeling better to me. So especially if you're just starting out as a colorist or just getting into this and doing it for the first time, I highly recommend getting used to using LUTs and learning how to use them. We have an entire pack inside this course designed by Drew Ticovey, who's incredible and just done amazing LUTs for you guys. Like literally, these are better than the ones that you can buy usually. So definitely check those out, download all of them, start putting them on your image and seeing how they affect it, and then go through and adjust that intensity slider and adjust your curves and your color wheels to make them work for what you're doing with your image. Again, LUTs are a really fantastic way to make your color grades go faster, but they're just a really good starting point to get you on the right track. Again, LUTs are a really good way to make your color grades go way faster, and they're especially a really good starting point to get you on the right track.